Hi there folks, today I'm planting out some of the tomatoes in the garden, so I wanted to take you along with me for this little task. So it's been 15 days since we started Hmm? since we started with the multi-sown tomatoes, and this original multi-sown tray is still here and they continue to grow even though slowly inside this massive of tomatoes. And in the meantime, the up-potted plants doubled in thickness and in height, and most importantly for me, they doubled in root structure, and I will show you that in a moment. So those plants here, they were potted up 2 weeks ago. I have a video of that process, very detailed, and I'll be linking to that in the description and probably in the cards if I remember. But if I don't, you can find it in my profile. So what happens today is I am taking out those out of the pots and putting them in the garden. So first I wanted to quickly show you one of the beds which hasn't been prepped so far. It had garlic last year and then it had some brassicas as a late crop. You can see that there's lots of Swiss chard volunteers here, lots of weeds as well, some of the winter rye cover crop which got eaten by neighbors' hens, and some of the kale which is flowering now very beautifully, and we left that for seed. But oh, and also some lovage growing here at the end, and this bed will be soon prepped, as we call it, which means my little helper wants to participate. So we will pull all of the weeds here, most of them. Maybe we'll leave some of the Swiss chard, and then we will use a digging fork to dig over, or not so dig over, but aerate the soil, and it will help us remove some of the more perennial and persistent weeds. And this here is a bed which already had this treatment. You can see that I have laid down the 2 lines of drip irrigation, and already I have put the tomato stakes in, indicating each of the tomato location inside of the bed. The width here is about 80 centimeters, maybe a bit more, due to the soil just slightly spreading to the sides. And the width between the two hoses is about 30 centimeters. And the drip hose has an opening each 30 centimeter, and those tomato stakes are 60 centimeters apart. So this one of the holes, this one is not occupied, and this one is for another tomato. All of the tomato stakes which we have here are grown in our garden or in the microforest. I have some videos of coppicing, so black locust, wild sour cherry, and elm are usually the materials which we're using for stakes. Now this bed here has received the similar treatment, and I have already put down the tomatoes which I'll be planting. You can see that the stakes are staggered, and this is how we will plant tomatoes. So between two spots in the line, it's a 60 centimeter distance, and in that direction is maybe 50 centimeters. And on each of the stakes we tie two tomato plants. Down here I have two plants of the same variety which is in this little pot. The 4 of those plus maybe 20 others were in the same cell of the multi-sown tray, and 15 days ago those were up potted. You can see they more than doubled in size. you can see the difference in thickness, and you will now see the difference in root structure when I pull them out of the pot. And this usually answers the questions which I get in the channel or in the chat server. Why am I uppotting? The main idea is to save time and to accelerate growth, but you have to be super precise with your timing, because the plants cannot spend too much time in those pots. So if you uppot them too early, they'll be too big and their growth will be stunted before the weather is good enough for planting in the garden. My little helper is bringing me some sorrel. So those all came from the same seed, and they grew in the same tray, in the same cell. Look at the difference in the size of the plants and size of the roots. And now when I'm planting those potted plants, I'll be putting them in the soil down to this leaf, and all of this stem will be turning into root system again. All of the root hairs will grow, all of the stem hairs will grow roots as well. One of the first things which I get asked online about our tomato planting is, why are we planting so dense? First of all, the usual distance between plants is 60 to 80 centimeters, and between rows as well. And most of the people plant single plants and not two plants in the same spot. But this all comes down to combination of growing conditions, personal preferences, and cultivation style. One of the distinctive things which we do with our tomatoes is that we prune them heavily. When they start branching out, each of the leaf nodes will start producing a new stem, and we're removing all of those stems up to the fourth flower cluster, so easily about my height. And all of those tomatoes, they grow as a single stem upwards, and a single cluster of flowers, and a single cluster of fruit after that. And all this space is not crowded by too much foliage, mostly because of the pruning which we do of the tomatoes. And this pruning happens maybe once or two times per week, depending on the growth speed of the plants. The idea being to not allow the tomato plants to waste any energy in producing those suckers, those side shoots, and to focus on growing their main tip and their main flower clusters, which usually are the most vigorous and most productive. Another thing to note is that our tomatoes usually don't grow as vigorously as you can usually see in YouTube videos, mainly because we don't fertilize our vegetables. You saw me when I uppotted those. I used our fine sieved compost, and this is the only fertilizer which we're adding. And now at planting time, in the holes which I'll be making, a small hole to receive this small pot, I'll be putting a handful of our compost to just top it up, to make it even. But all around in the bed is the natural soil, which is our very clay vert soil here in the garden. Plus, we don't water the tomatoes very often. I've seen YouTube advice and even articles which state that you basically shouldn't allow the soil around the tomatoes to dry out. But this is a certain recipe for fungal problems, especially with hot summers. So what we do is we keep the moisture levels at minimum, which means that we water rarely and deeply. One of the usual schedules on which we water is once a week, Sunday night we water for several hours with the drip line, and this saturates the bed deeply and even allows some of the soil around to be well saturated. And in effect, this drives the roots of the tomatoes downwards. After I'm planting those today, I'll be watering each of the tomatoes with maybe 2 liters of water to just settle the soil around the roots, and then they won't be receiving any watering, even from the drip line, until they start flowering, which will be in several weeks. And then when they start flowering, we will probably begin watering them once a week. So now for the actual planting, I'm using a small tool here to just make a little hole, not too big. Basically, I need it to be enough to hold the pot. Oh, thanks. I need it to hold the pot plus some of the stems, so they also root. I'm dropping the whole pot just to measure the depth. This seems good enough. Now I'm removing the plant from the pot. You can see that the roots have started to stick from the bottom. This is a good sign. It's a proper time to start planting them out. And then I'm positioning them so they each come from a different side of this tomato stake here. A handful of compost, press it down gently, and then return the original soil, our garden soil, around the plants to allow most of the stems to be covered. I need just the growing tips sticking out with this 3 or 4 leaf growth which they managed to produce. And on to the next one. Each of the pots have this sticker with a permanent marker noting the variety, and they are numbered, so later I can put a chart down in the computer or in my notebook noting the sequence of the varieties in the bed. I usually try to plant them numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. But sometimes there might be a need for other sequence, so leaving the pots here will help me later have my records straight. So now with the planting done, what's left for me is to water those planted tomatoes, and then I'll mulch them. You can see that I planted the whole of the stem up to the first leaf, and if the stem was a bit short, I removed the side leaves just so I can have more of a stem to root in the coming weeks. And the mulch here will be probably straw because we run out of mown grass. And finally, I wanted to show you how I clean up those potted tomatoes. You can see that those two have been cleaned. All of the lower leaves have been removed and they will be planted up to this point. I can even remove this one if I decide that I don't have enough of a length. And those are exactly the same variety and they haven't been cleaned up yet. So you can see that here the cotyledons, I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but they have not been removed at potting time. so I'm removing them now. Few very tiny weeds which have grown here from the compost, and then I'm inspecting to see the stems, and this could be enough, but if I wanted a longer stem, I could be removing those side leaves here as well. I'll do that just to demonstrate very quickly. The removal of leaves is not really a problem for the tomato, because in any case this will be under the soil, and when you remove the lower leaves, it promotes growth upwards. So I'll have to clean up those as well, have a few remaining, and plant those in the second bed. Okay, so that was all for today, and I'll see you in the next one.